At my father's retirement party, he raised his glass and said, "To my only son who ever made me proud," while staring straight at my brother. I laughed, pulled out a flash drive, and said, "Then you'll love what's on this." By the time it hit the screen, the room was dead silent, and my mother was already walking toward me with that look in her eyes. I, 34M, never thought I'd be the type to destroy my family at a retirement party, but here we are. The evening started like any other celebration for my father's 40-year career at the engineering firm. Mom had spent weeks planning every detail, from the catering to the slideshow of his professional achievements. The venue was packed with colleagues, relatives, and family friends who'd known us for decades. My brother showed up in his usual designer suit, flashing that confident smile he'd perfected since landing his VP position at a tech company 3 years ago. Growing up, I was always the academic one. Straight A's, valedictorian, full scholarship to MIT for computer engineering. My brother was the charmer who barely scraped through community college but somehow landed on his feet through connections and smooth talking. Yet somehow, in my father's eyes, I was perpetually second place. Dad would brag about my brother's latest promotion while glossing over my published research papers. When I developed a cybersecurity protocol that saved my company millions, Dad mentioned it once at dinner, then spent 20 minutes discussing my brother's new car. The pattern was so consistent that I'd stopped expecting recognition years ago. But tonight felt different. Maybe it was the significance of retirement, or perhaps the audience of people who actually knew my accomplishments. I found myself hoping that finally, after 34 years, my father might acknowledge what I'd achieved. The speeches began around 9. Colleagues shared stories about Dad's dedication and mentorship. Mom gave a touching tribute about his commitment to family. Then Dad stood up, glass raised, scanning the room with that authoritative presence he'd always commanded. He thanked his colleagues and spoke about the importance of leaving a legacy. Then his eyes found my brother, and something in his expression shifted to pure pride. He raised his glass higher and declared that he wanted to toast his only son who ever made him proud. The room erupted in polite applause while I sat there, glass halfway to my lips, processing what had just happened. Not just ignored this time, but actively erased. In front of everyone we knew, he'd essentially declared that I didn't exist as his son. My brother looked uncomfortable for exactly 2 seconds before accepting the accolades with his trademark grin. People were clapping, some looking confused because they obviously knew he had 2 sons, but following his lead nonetheless. That's when I started laughing. Not a polite chuckle, but genuine laughter that cut through the applause and made heads turn. Because 3 months ago, I discovered something about my golden boy brother that would have made Dad's engineering mind spin. It started with a routine security audit at my company. We'd noticed some unusual access patterns in our system, and as the head of cybersecurity, I was investigating potential breaches. The trail led to an IP address registered to my brother's company, but the access timestamps didn't match any legitimate business hours or authorized personnel. Digging deeper revealed a sophisticated embezzlement scheme. My brother had been using his position to redirect client payments to shell accounts he'd created. The amounts were small enough to avoid immediate detection, but substantial enough that over 2 years, he'd stolen nearly $800,000. The digital forensics were ironclad, and I'd spent weeks verifying every detail. I debated what to do with this information for months. Part of me wanted to confront him directly, give him a chance to come clean and make restitution. But another part, the part that had watched him coast through life on charm, while I worked twice as hard for half the recognition, wanted justice. Tonight's toast made the decision for me. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the flash drive I'd been carrying for weeks, just in case. The room was still buzzing with conversation about Dad's touching tribute when I stood up and plugged it into the presentation laptop that had been showing Dad's career highlights. I announced that since we were celebrating Dad's legacy and his pride in his only worthy son, everyone should see what kind of man my brother really was. My voice carried across the room with the kind of confidence that comes from having absolute certainty in your facts. The screen flickered, and suddenly everyone was looking at bank statements, transaction records, and email communications that painted a very clear picture. I'd organized everything chronologically, with highlighted sections showing the pattern of theft. The evidence was presented like the engineering report it essentially was, methodical and undeniable. The silence that followed was profound. You could hear chairs creaking as people shifted to get a better view of the screen. My brother's face had gone completely white, and he was staring at the display like he was watching his own execution. Dad looked confused at first. Then his expression shifted to horror as he began to understand what he was seeing. This was a man who'd built his entire career on precision and integrity, watching his favorite son exposed as a thief in front of his professional peers. But it was my mother's reaction that really struck me. She wasn't looking at the screen anymore. She was looking directly at me with an expression I'd never seen before, and she was walking toward me with purpose. Not the shocked confusion of everyone else, but something that looked almost like recognition. She reached me just as my brother started stammering attempts at explanation to the crowd. Mom gripped my arm and asked quietly if I understood what I'd just done. I told her I understood perfectly. I'd shown everyone exactly who Dad's golden boy really was. She shook her head and said that wasn't what she meant. She asked if I'd considered the consequences, not just for my brother, but for our entire family. The retirement party had become a crime scene, essentially. Dad's celebration was now forever linked to his son's disgrace. Looking around the room, I could see people already reaching for their phones. This wasn't just family drama anymore. My brother worked for a prominent tech company, and several of his colleagues were at the party. The professional implications would be immediate and devastating. Dad had moved to the screen and was studying the evidence with the same methodical approach he'd applied to engineering problems for 4 decades. He was asking my brother specific questions about dates and amounts, and my brother's responses were becoming increasingly incoherent. That's when my brother tried to shift blame to me. He suggested I might have fabricated the evidence out of jealousy, that I'd always resented his success. But the beauty of digital forensics is that it's nearly impossible to fake convincingly, especially when you're dealing with multiple financial institutions and communication platforms. I walked to the microphone and explained exactly how I discovered the theft, the verification process I'd used, and why the evidence was authentic. I spoke in the same calm, technical tone I used for security briefings, treating it like any other professional presentation. The room remained silent except for my voice explaining banking protocols and digital timestamps. These people understood evidence and methodology. They could see this wasn't a jealous brother making accusations, but a cybersecurity expert presenting facts. My brother made one final desperate attempt to salvage the situation. He stood up and began apologizing, claiming the pressure of supporting his lifestyle had led him to make terrible decisions. He promised to pay everything back and make amends. But Dad cut him off. He said that integrity wasn't something you could apologize your way back to. In 40 years of engineering, he'd learned that some failures were catastrophic because they revealed fundamental flaws in the foundation. The party essentially ended at that moment. People began leaving quietly, some stopping to shake Dad's hand or offer awkward condolences. My brother's colleagues left quickly, undoubtedly already making phone calls to their company's legal department. Update 1. The fallout began immediately. By Monday morning, my brother had been suspended pending investigation. His company's internal audit confirmed everything I presented, and they discovered additional irregularities I hadn't even found. The total theft was actually closer to $1.2 million when they included corporate credit card abuse and falsified expense reports. Dad called me that Tuesday and asked to meet for lunch. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I agreed. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 3 days. He said he'd spent the weekend reviewing everything I'd shown at the party, and he had questions about my motivation. I explained that I'd been carrying the evidence for months, unsure what to do with it. His toast simply provided the final push I needed. I told him I was tired of being invisible while my brother was celebrated for accomplishments built on theft. Dad was quiet for a long time, then admitted he'd been unfair to me over the years. He said he'd always taken my achievements for granted because they came so naturally, while my brother had to struggle for everything. He thought he was being encouraging to my brother and that I didn't need the same level of support. I pointed out that everyone needs recognition from their parents, regardless of their natural abilities. Just because I succeeded academically didn't mean I didn't want his approval or acknowledgement. He agreed and said he was proud of me, both for my professional accomplishments and for having the integrity to expose the truth, even when it was difficult. But he also asked if I understood that I'd essentially destroyed any chance of family reconciliation. Update 2. My brother was arrested 2 weeks later. The company pressed charges, and the district attorney decided to prosecute aggressively due to the amount involved and the sophisticated nature of the scheme. His lawyer suggested he'd likely face federal charges as well, since the embezzlement crossed state lines through various shell companies. Mom called me the day of his arrest. She was crying and asked how I could do this to my own brother. I reminded her that I didn't steal the money or create the evidence. I'd simply revealed what was already true. She said that families protect each other, even when someone makes mistakes. I asked her if she'd feel the same way if I'd been the one stealing, and she went quiet. We both knew the answer. My brother had always been her favorite too, and the standards applied to us had never been equal. The professional consequences extended beyond just my brother. His company faced client lawsuits and regulatory scrutiny. Several high-profile clients terminated their contracts, citing concerns about security and oversight. The company's stock price dropped 12% in the first week after the story broke. Dad's retirement, which should have been a celebration of a distinguished career, became overshadowed by family scandal. Several colleagues reached out to express support, but I could tell he was embarrassed by the association. I began questioning whether the revenge had been worth it. Yes, justice was served, and yes, I'd finally gotten my father's recognition. But I'd also destroyed any semblance of family unity and turned what should have been a milestone celebration into a nightmare. Update 3. 3 months later, my brother pleaded guilty to federal embezzlement charges. His lawyer negotiated a deal that included full restitution and a 4-year prison sentence. The judge noted that the sophisticated nature of the scheme and the breach of corporate trust warranted serious consequences. During the sentencing hearing, my brother gave a statement apologizing to his former clients and colleagues. He also apologized to our family for the shame he'd brought to our name. He looked directly at me when he said he understood why I'd exposed him and that he probably would have done the same thing in my position. Dad attended the sentencing with Mom, but I stayed away. I'd accomplished what I set out to do, and watching my brother go to prison felt like enough closure. The family dynamics shifted permanently after that. Mom barely spoke to me, maintaining civil contact only during major holidays. She blamed me for destroying her son's life, even though we both knew he'd done that himself years before I discovered it. Dad and I developed a closer relationship, ironically. He made genuine efforts to acknowledge my work and include me in family discussions. But it felt hollow sometimes, knowing it had taken destroying my brother to earn his respect. 6 months after the sentencing, I received a letter from my brother in prison. He wrote that he'd had time to think about everything that had happened. He admitted he'd been stealing for over 3 years, not 2, and that the pressure of living up to everyone's expectations had driven him to increasingly desperate measures. He said he didn't blame me for exposing him because he'd known eventually someone would discover what he was doing. In a strange way, he felt relieved that the charade was finally over. He asked if we might be able to rebuild some kind of relationship when he got out, acknowledging that it would never be the same. I never responded to that letter. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. The retirement party had lasted less than 3 hours, but it had redefined our entire family structure. I'd gotten my revenge and my father's recognition, but at a cost that sometimes felt too high. Justice had been served, but families aren't courtrooms, and some victories leave everyone wounded. Looking back now, I wonder if there might have been another way to handle the discovery. Could I have confronted my brother privately? Given him a chance to confess and make restitution? Would that have preserved our family while still ensuring justice? But then I remember the look on Dad's face when he toasted his only son who ever made me proud, and I know I made the choice that felt right in that moment. Sometimes the truth is more important than family harmony, even when that truth destroys everything you thought you knew about the people you love. The flash drive sits in my desk drawer now, empty of its explosive contents, but heavy with memories of that night when I chose justice over family unity. I don't regret the choice, but I understand now that some decisions reshape your entire world in ways you never expected.